Kira tightened her grip on the folder as the conference room door clicked shut. On the other side of the frosted glass, her husband's family took their seats around the long walnut table. Laughter, the scrape of chairs, the low hum of voices she knew too well. She could see their blurred shapes through the glass, but not one of them had thought to hold the door for her. She stood in the hallway of the Holden Group's top floor, the logo in brushed steel above the reception desk glinting like a quiet warning. Holden Group. Family owned. Family led. Family first. Unless apparently you were the wrong kind of family. The receptionist, a nervous guy in his 20s, shifted behind his desk. He'd watched the whole thing. How Kira had walked up to the door with Ethan, her husband, how she had taken a breath to step in beside him, and how Martin Holden, her father-in-law, had reached back, caught Ethan's elbow, and said the 4 words that made the air taste like metal. Family meeting. Spouses stay outside. He hadn't looked at her when he said it. Just at Ethan, as if she were a coat he expected his son to hang up before entering real life. Kira forced her jaw to unclench. The folder edge dug into her palm. Contracts, quarterly reports, purchase orders, a neatly tabbed summary she'd stayed up half the night preparing. Not because she needed their help, because she'd thought, foolishly, that being the Holden Group's largest client and their daughter-in-law meant she belonged at that table. Inside the room, a chair scraped loudly. Someone cracked a joke. She could hear Denise's bright, performative laugh. The one Kira had learned meant she was performing the ideal business matriarch. The sound made Kira's shoulders tighten. The receptionist cleared his throat. Mrs. Holden? Do you want me to bring you coffee or something while you wait? There it was again. Mrs. Holden. The name that made her sound like an accessory, instead of who she actually was. Kira Navar, 34 years old, founder and CEO of Redwood Lane Interiors, the company that accounted for nearly half of Holden Group's annual revenue. The woman whose designs filled hotel chains from Dubai to Vancouver, whose procurement team paid Holden invoices on time every single month. No, thanks, Liam, she said softly. I won't be staying long. She turned from the glass and walked to the far end of the hallway, where a floor-to-ceiling window showed a slice of downtown. Cars moving silently below. People crossing streets, tiny and determined. For a second, she pressed the folder against her chest, as if it could steady the thudding in there. Family meeting. Spouses stay outside. It wasn't the first time the Holdens had made her small. Just the cleanest. Ethan had tried in his way. He'd glanced back, his hand half reaching for hers before Martin's grip tightened on his arm. Not now, son. She'd heard Martin say. We've got to talk strategy. We'll update her at dinner. She's a client. We don't mix clients with internal. A client. The word stung more than it should have. When Ethan had first brought her to this building, 2 years into their marriage, he'd looked proud, as if he were introducing her to a kingdom she would someday help rule. But the longer she'd watched, the more she understood. To Martin, to Denise, to Ethan's older brother Lucas, she was useful, not equal. Useful for volume. Useful for the glow of her success at family holidays. Useful for the story they told at charity galas, about how Ethan's wife had this darling little interiors company that Holden Group was gracious enough to supply. Never mind that Redwood Lane Interiors had started in a studio apartment with second-hand furniture and a maxed-out credit card. Never mind that Kira had taken every client call herself for the first 3 years, that she'd eaten canned soup at midnight while drafting proposals. In the Holden narrative, she had married into power and then been handed a business as a hobby. She had let them believe that, because correcting them felt like starting a fight she hadn't had the energy for. Now, listening to the muffled sounds behind the door, she realized the fight had started without her. Her phone buzzed in her blazer pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from Priya, her operations director at Redwood Lane. "How's the big Holden summit? They behaving? Or do I need to send a rescue mission with coffee and sarcastic commentary?" Kira exhaled through her nose, a humorless almost laugh. Her thumbs hovered over the keyboard. Banned from the room. Spouses not allowed in family strategy meetings, even if they pay for half the table. She hit send before she could soften it. 3 dots appeared immediately. Priya was fast. "You're kidding. Another bubble. Tell me you walked in anyway." Kira's fingers tightened around the phone. She looked back at the conference room door. Through the frosted glass, she could see Martin's silhouette at the head of the table, one hand already lifted like a conductor. Ethan sat to his right, shoulders slightly hunched the way they got when his father started talking about Legacy. A shadow near the far side must have been Lucas, clicking his pen, probably pitching some new risky expansion. Kira thought of the numbers in her folder, of the column that showed just how dependent the Holden Group was on Redwood Lane's contracts, of the note she'd written in the margin at 2 a.m, "You re not stuck." "They are," she typed back. "No scene. Not worth it. But I'm taking notes." Priya's reply came after a beat. "Okay. Breathe. You want to call? Vent? Murder plan? I'm free." Kira's thumb hovered over the call button. Then she shook her head and slid the phone back into her pocket. Hain. Analysis. Decision. That was how she'd always survived. She could feel herself somewhere in the second step now, the edges of the wound already hardening into clarity. She turned away from the window and walked back down the hallway, past the conference room, past Liam's uncertain gaze. At the elevator she paused, the mirrored doors reflecting a composed woman in a charcoal blazer and silk blouse, dark hair pinned in a twist. No one looking at her would see the girl she had been at 22, hauling paint cans up narrow stairwells because it was cheaper than hiring help. "Leaving already?" Liam asked gently. "Apparently I was never here," Kira said, and pressed the elevator button. As the doors slid shut, she caught one last, muffled sentence from inside the room. Martin's voice, firm and satisfied. "Our biggest client isn't going anywhere. Redwood Lane is family. We've got them locked in." Dinner that night was at the Holdens' sprawling house in the hills, the one Denise liked to call the nest. Kira had always thought of it as something closer to a stage. She sat at the long dining table between Ethan and Denise's sister, smiling when she was supposed to, laughing softly at the right cues. The table was covered in food. Roasted salmon, truffled potatoes, 3 different salads nobody touched. A crystal vase of white lily blocked her view of Martin at the far end, but she could hear him just fine. "The numbers look strong," he was saying. "We're on track to open the new distribution center by next fall. Once that's up, we'll leverage Redwood Lane's volume to negotiate better freight rates across the board." Kira's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Ethan's knee bumped hers under the table, a subtle nudge. A "hey, don't start." She swallowed the bite slowly. "You had the strategy meeting today, then?" she asked, voice mild. Denise dabbed at the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. "Oh, it was just a little family thing," she said, as if that explained everything. "Boring numbers." "You would have hated it." "I might have survived," Kira said, "given that the boring numbers are my purchase orders." Lucas snorted from across the table. "Come on, Kira. You know what Dad meant. It's governance, estate planning, all that. You don't want to be dragged into that mess." "I don't mind mess," she replied. "I mind being discussed like a line item without my consent." The table went very still for half a second, as if the air had misheard her. Ethan's hand slid to her knee, fingers pressing lightly, A warning. Martin chuckled, the sound big and genial. No one's discussing you, sweetheart, he said. We're discussing business. Your family. Different category. Kira looked down at her plate. For a moment the salmon blurred. Your family when it's convenient, she thought. A client when it's not. Never both at once. Pain. She let herself feel it this time, really feel it, instead of pushing it aside in the name of keeping the peace. The humiliation in the hallway. The assumption that she would wait. The way Ethan had walked into that room without her. Actually, she said quietly, I'm both. And I'm the one whose company represents 47% of your annual revenue. So I would have liked a seat. There. It was out. Calm, measured, a simple statement of fact. Lucas's fork clinked against his plate. 47. That seems high. I brought the reports with me, Kira said. If you're curious. Martin waved a hand. Let's not drag work to the dinner table, he said, as if he hadn't just done exactly that. You know, we value Redwood Lane. But your company is one of many pieces in a much bigger picture. That's what today was about. One of many. Kira thought of the spreadsheet she had printed this afternoon after leaving the office. The one with the Holden Group's client list sorted by revenue. Redwood Lane had been on the top line, bolded by the software, because the difference between first and second was so significant. She laid her fork down carefully. Of course, she said, and smiled as if the conversation didn't feel like someone was pushing her out of her own life. Ethan took the hint. He launched into a story about a golf game with a client. The kind of easy anecdote that smoothed his mother's furrowed brow and made his father nod approvingly. Kira let the words roll over her without meaning. Underestimated. Dismissed. The emotions that had once felt like passing storms were hardening into something else now. Something colder and annoyingly clear. She sipped her wine and listened as Martin described the new distribution center again. This time for Denise's benefit, as if Kira weren't there. The key is leverage, he said. If your biggest client is family, they're never walking away. That's how you build an empire that lasts. Kira felt her lips tilt in a small, private smile. Interesting, she thought. Let's test that. The next morning, she was at her own office by 7. Redwood Lane's headquarters sat in a converted warehouse with tall windows and exposed beams, the kind of space that design blogs like to photograph. Kira had chosen it not for the aesthetic, but for the flexibility. Open floor plans, high ceilings, room to expand. Room to grow in directions no one but her had believed possible. She let herself in, the alarm system chirping as she disarmed it. The open-plan workspace was empty, desks bare, sample boards propped against walls. The quiet felt clean. In her glass-walled corner office, she dropped her bag, opened her laptop, and spread the Holden folder out on the desk. In the morning light, the printouts looked almost harmless. Revenue breakdowns, payment histories, contract copies. The latest supply agreement sat on top, its language dense and familiar. She had read it a dozen times when the lawyers first sent it over, making sure the terms were fair. Back then she'd thought of it as evidence of partnership. Now she read it like a door map. Termination, notice periods, obligations, power, hiding in plain sight. She traced the line with her finger. Either party may terminate this agreement without cause by providing 90 days written notice. 90 days. 3 months. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. Instead, she felt a strange, spreading calm, the kind that always came when a decision had already been made, and her body was just catching up. She pulled a yellow legal pad toward her and wrote at the top in block letters, "What do I owe them?" Underneath, she listed everything she could think of. Consistency, timely payments, clear communication, respect. She stared at the last two words for a long moment. Then she drew a neat line down the middle of the page and titled the other column, "What do they owe me?" She didn't have to think as hard. Quality product, fair pricing, transparency, respect. Again. And if they can't give it, then distance. At the bottom of the page, she wrote one more line, the ink digging into the paper. Stop begging for a seat at a table you paid for. A breath left her chest in one slow exhale. There it was. The clean, ugly truth she'd been circling for months. Priya arrived 20 minutes later with 2 coffees and an overstuffed tote bag. She paused in the doorway, taking in the spread of documents. "Wow," she said. "Did you sleep here?" "Thought about it," Kira said, taking the offered cup. "But then I remembered I enjoy not being a ghost." Priya sank into the chair opposite Kira's desk. Her dark hair was twisted into a messy bun, a pen already tucked behind her ear. "So," she said, "tell me everything before my caffeine hits and I start making charts." Kira told her. About the hallway. About the closed door. About Martin's words at dinner. About the way Ethan's hand had tightened on her knee. More worried about the ripples than the stone itself. Priya listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from disbelief to anger to something like quiet calculation. When Kira finished, silence settled between them for a moment. The only sound was the soft hum of the HVAC. "Okay," Priya said finally. "They think they own you because you're family." "They think family means I don't walk away," Kira said. "That I'll keep paying their invoices while they decide whether I'm decorative enough to sit at their table." "Are they wrong?" Priya asked gently. Kira looked down at the pad of paper, at the line she'd written. "Stop begging." "They used to be," she said. "Not anymore." Priya's shoulders relaxed. "Good," she said. "Then here's what we're going to do. We're going to figure out exactly how much leverage they think they have. And then we're going to take it back, piece by piece, without lighting ourselves on fire in the process. Pain, analysis, decision, action." Kira nodded. "Pull the latest vendor performance reports," she said. "All categories. Compare Holden to every other supplier. I want to know where they're our only option, and where we already have alternatives." Priya grinned, some of her usual mischief returning. "On it." "And Kira?" "Yeah. Next time they try to bar you from a room, remember this moment. Remember that the room is small. You're not." Kira let the words sit inside her like a stone in a river, unmoved by the current. She swiveled back to her computer and opened her email. In the subject line of a new message, she typed, "Exploring options, supply chain diversification." She addressed it to an old contact she hadn't spoken to in nearly a year. "Hi, Adriana. I've been thinking about our last conversation." Her fingers flew. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you." 3 weeks later, Kira sat at a corner table in a quiet hotel cafe, stirring her tea while rain traced aimless paths down the window beside her. The city moved on the other side of the glass, blurred and distant. Across from her, Adriana Campos, CEO of Greyline Supply, watched her with bright, assessing eyes. She was in her late 40s, with silver threads in her dark hair, and the kind of posture that said she'd been underestimated too many times to count and was done with it. "So," Adriana said, folding her hands on the table, "you're finally ready." Kira smiled faintly. Apparently being locked out of a conference room was the motivation I needed. Adriana's mouth curved. Men do love building rooms they think you can't enter, she said. The trick is realizing you can build your own building instead. On the table between them lay a neatly stacked folder, the Grey Line logo embossed on the front. Next to it sat a thinner folder with the Holden Group's latest proposal, edges already slightly worn from how often Kira had flipped back and forth between the two. I don't want to blow up anything, Kira said. I'm not interested in revenge that leaves my own company bleeding. I have staff, contractors, clients who rely on us not to be chaotic. You want a quiet exit, Adriana said. Strategic. Controlled. Yes, Adriana nodded. Then we do this in phases. You start by moving categories where the Holdens are weakest. We demonstrate we can match or beat their terms. Meanwhile, we draft a broader agreement that lets you shift more volume when you're ready. By the time your 90-day termination window starts, you'll already have proof of concept. 90 days. Kira had circled that number so many times in her notes that the page had almost torn. It had become a mantra. Not a countdown to chaos, but a runway to freedom. And if they notice? Kira asked. They will, Adriana said. But they'll underestimate the seriousness until it's too late. People who think they own you always do. Kira thought of Martin's easy confidence at the dinner table. Our biggest client isn't going anywhere. What do you get out of this? She asked. Besides my business. Adriana's eyes softened. Besides the satisfaction of poaching Holden's golden goose? She said dryly. I get a partner who understands that leverage goes both ways. I've watched you, Kira. Redwood Lane isn't a fluke, it's you. I like betting on people like you. Kira let the compliment land and then pass through her, not grabbing onto it like a lifeline. She'd done that once before with the Holdens. Never again. If we do this, she said, we do it right. My team needs stability. Clear timelines. No surprises. Adriana slid a page from her folder and turned it around. Then let's start here, she said. Phase 1. You move 20% of your volume in non-core categories to Grey Line over 60 days. No penalties. Match or beat pricing. At the end of that period, you evaluate. If we haven't met or exceeded Holden's performance, you walk. No hard feelings. Kira studied the numbers. Her mind did what it always did. Ran scenarios, contingencies, worst case and best case side by side. And if you do meet it, she said slowly, we move to phase 2. Exactly. Phase 2 was the part that would make Martin's voice lose that lazy confidence. A broader supply agreement, volume benchmarks, preferred client discounts that Holden had never managed to offer without strings attached. Kira leaned back and folded her arms. They'll see it as betrayal, she said. Family walking away. Adriana's gaze was steady. They already betrayed you when they decided your role was decorative, she said. All you're doing is correcting the math. Correcting the math. The phrase clicked into place in Kira's chest like a puzzle piece that had been waiting for years. She reached for the pen. I'll need my legal team to review this, she said. But, yes. Let's move forward. As she signed her name on the preliminary agreement, Kira felt no rush of vindictive joy, no dramatic surge of triumph, just a deep, quiet alignment, like her life had been slightly off its axis and was finally settling into place. Pain, analysis, decision, action, one step at a time. Outside of her office, the world kept turning. The Holdens continued to invite her to Sunday dinners. They continued to mention Redwood Lane when it made them look good, and forget her in conversations that required actual power. At one dinner, Martin told a cousin about how he'd given Ethan's wife her start. She was spinning her wheels, he said, topping off his wine. Talented girl, of course, but no head for numbers. We folded her into our supplier network, gave her stability. Now look at her. Kira caught Ethan's eye across the table. He winced, half apologetic. He doesn't mean it like that, Ethan mouthed. Kira simply smiled and turned back to her plate. She had stopped correcting their fantasies months ago, because by then, Phase 1 had already begun. Quietly, methodically, Priya and the procurement team shifted targeted categories to Greyline. Packaging here, specialized materials there. Areas where Holden had always been just on the edge of competent, kept around more out of habit than performance. When minor hiccups appeared in the transition, Kira dealt with them before they became reasons to doubt. She refused to sabotage her own move just to prove a point. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about building a foundation that didn't rest on someone else's assumption that she'd never leave. At the end of 60 days, she sat with Priya and Quentin, their finance director, in the same glass-walled office with a fresh stack of reports. Savings? She asked. Quentin pushed his glasses up his nose. 7% overall on the categories we moved, he said. Service levels are higher. Fewer delays. Fewer excuses. Priya tapped a chart with her pen. And the most interesting part? She said. Holden hasn't dropped their prices to compete. They either haven't noticed the volume shift or they think it's a blip. Kira's lips twitched. They don't check the reports, she said. They check the story in their heads. In that story, I'm loyal first and rational second. What are you? Priya asked softly. Kira looked down at the numbers, at the clean lines of data that didn't care about family dinners or last names. I'm rational first, she said. And I've been loyal to people who treat me like a safety net, not a partner. That ends now. She turned to a tab in her binder labeled PHASE2. 90 days, she thought. Not a threat. A promise. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The night everything came into focus, the Holdens hosted their annual Legacy Gala. It was the event Martin lived for all year. 300 guests in black tie, a charity auction, speeches about community impact. The Holden Group's logo projected on every surface. Ethan in a tailored suit, Denise glittering in diamonds, Lucas working the room like a politician. Kira stood at the edge of the ballroom for a moment, letting the scene wash over her. Gold light, clinking glasses, the soft murmur of donors congratulating themselves. She wore a simple black dress that skimmed her figure and stopped at her ankles, paired with a single thin gold bracelet. She had never liked peacocking. Tonight she didn't need to. In her clutch, neatly folded, lay 3 documents. A finalized, signed agreement with Greyline Supply for a multi-year, multi-million-dollar partnership. A termination letter addressed to Holden Group's contract division, invoking the 90-day clause. And a summary page, prepared by Quentin, that translated everything into a language Martin understood. Percentages, projections, impact. Ethan found her near the bar, his tie already slightly loosened. You look incredible, he murmured, kissing her cheek. Thank you, she said. So do you. He followed her gaze to the stage, where Martin was rehearsing his speech with the event coordinator. He's going to mention you tonight, Ethan said. Redwood Lane. He said he wanted to highlight the synergy. Maybe that'll make up for the whole meeting thing. Kira's mouth curved. The meeting thing, she repeated. He winced. I know. I'm sorry. I should have pushed harder. She looked at him fully then, taking in the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his hair was beginning to grey at the temples. They'd been married 8 years. 8 years of shared breakfasts and late-night takeout and holidays split between their families and the quiet, Constant work of trying to build something together. Why didn't you? She asked. He sighed. Because it was a Holden thing, he admitted. And I've spent my whole life being told there are things you just don't challenge. Not if you want peace. Peace for whom? She asked. He didn't answer. In that silence, something in her finally settled. She had been waiting, she realized, for years. Waiting for Ethan to choose her fully. Not just in private. Not just when it was easy. Waiting for him to say, my wife is not a decorative add-on. He loved her. She didn't doubt that. But he loved peace more. Kira touched his arm. We'll talk later, she said. Enjoy the speeches. When the time came, Martin took the stage to polite applause. He thanked the donors. Told a mildly funny story about starting the company with a borrowed truck and a dream. Kira had heard it so often she could have recited it herself. Tonight, he said, I want to recognize someone very special in our extended family. Our biggest client. A company that has stood by us through thick and thin, that has trusted us with their growth. He smiled out at the crowd, his gaze seeking her. Redwood Lane Interiors, he said. Led by my daughter-in-law, Kira. Stand up, sweetheart. The room turned toward her. Kira rose slowly, feeling hundreds of eyes on her. She smiled, nodding slightly as people applauded. In Martin's story, she was a supporting character, the grateful beneficiary of Holden Group's generosity. He didn't know that the script had already changed. When family succeeds, Martin continued, we all succeed. That's the power of keeping business in the family. There it was again. Family as a chain. Family as a guarantee. Kira sat down when the applause faded, pulse steady. She waited through the rest of the speech, through the auction, through the video montage of scholarships and food drives. She waited until dessert plates were cleared and people began to relax, jackets unbuttoned, ties loosened. Then she stood. At their table, Denise blinked. Going somewhere, darling? Just over there, Kira said, nodding toward the small riser at the side of the room where the band's microphone stood between sets. Ethan frowned. Kira. She leaned down and kissed his cheek. Breathe, she murmured. I'm not here to burn anything down. Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor as she crossed the room. A few heads turned. She was, after all, the woman who had just been publicly praised. The coordinator spotted her and hurried over. Everything okay, Ms. Navarre? She asked. May I borrow the microphone for a moment? Kira asked. I promise I'll be brief. There must have been something in her tone, because the coordinator didn't protest. Moments later, the band's leader stepped back, and Kira found herself standing in a wash of warm light, the microphone cool in her hand. She did not clear her throat. She did not clink a glass. She simply waited until the room's natural noise dipped enough for her voice to carry. Good evening, she said. The words slid into the space, gentle but firm. Conversations tapered off. Faces turned toward her, some curious, some already halfway to impatient. At the Holden table, Martin's smile froze. I wasn't on the program, Kira said, but since I was just introduced as an example of the power of family in business, I thought it might be useful to share my side of that story. A ripple went through the crowd. Ethan had gone very still. Denise looked like someone had swapped her champagne for vinegar. Lucas muttered something under his breath. Kira held the microphone lightly, the way she held a pen when she was about to sign something that mattered. I'm Kira Navarre, she said. I founded Redwood Lane Interiors 12 years ago in a studio apartment with 2 clients and no backup plan. The Holden Group became our primary supplier 5 years ago. Since then, we've grown together. I've been proud of that. She let that hang there for a beat, acknowledging the truth of it. This was not a hit piece. It was a recalculation. But partnership, she continued, requires more than shared invoices. It requires respect, transparency, a belief that everyone at the table deserves to be there. She saw a few women in the audience straighten in their chairs. Recently, she said, I was reminded that not everyone shares that belief. I was asked to wait outside of a meeting where my company's business was being discussed. As a spouse, not as the CEO of the client that represents nearly half of the Holden Group's revenue. There it was. The knife slid in, not with a scream, but with a sentence. A murmur rose, quickly stifled. Kira didn't look at Martin. She didn't need to. I have spent years making myself smaller to keep the peace, she said, laughing off comments about how I was given a leg up, staying quiet when credit was misplaced, telling myself it was easier not to correct the story. She inhaled slowly. I'm done doing that. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She reached into her clutch and drew out the summary page. She didn't hold it up theatrically. She glanced at it once and then spoke. As of tonight, she said, Redwood Lane Interiors has entered into a new partnership with Grey Line Supply. Over the next 90 days, we will be transitioning the majority of our business to them. The room went very, very quiet. This is not a decision I made lightly, she said. It affects my staff, my clients, and yes, the Holden Group. But I owe it to my company, and to myself, to work with partners who recognize that being family does not entitle you to my silence. She finally turned her head and met Martin's eyes across the room. They were wide, disbelieving, a man watching a script disintegrate in his hands. To be clear, Kira said, this is not punishment. It's alignment. The Holden Group will receive formal notice in writing on Monday. In accordance with our contract, they will have 90 days of continued business as we transition. I will honor every obligation we agreed to. But after that, she let the sentence trail off. After that, she didn't owe them anything but the truth. Thank you, she said simply, and handed the microphone back. For a long heartbeat, there was no sound. Then, from somewhere near the back of the room, a single pair of hands began to clap. Quiet, measured. Others joined, hesitant at first, then building, until the applause was polite and uneven but undeniable. Kira stepped down from the riser and walked back toward the edge of the room. She could feel eyes on her like heat on skin. Some admiring, some appalled, some calculating. Ethan intercepted her halfway. What was that? He hissed under his breath. You blindsided him. Kira looked at him, really looked at him. No, she said. He blinded himself. I just turned the lights on. You could have talked to us first, he said. To me, every time I tried, she replied. You told me not to rock the boat. This isn't me rocking it for fun, Ethan. This is me getting out before it sinks and takes everything I built with it. His face crumpled, hurt and defensiveness tangling. So that's it? You're just done? The question cut deeper than she'd expected. I don't know yet, she said honestly. With us. I know I'm done waiting for your family to see me. I know I'm done treating my company like a bargaining chip in someone else's game. He swallowed. What do you want from me? She thought of all the answers she could give. Choose me. Stand up. Speak when it costs you something. Instead, she said, I want you to decide who you are when your father isn't watching. She stepped around him gently and kept walking. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin. The valet brought her car around, and she slid into the driver's seat. The bustle of the gala muted as the door shut. Her phone buzzed on the console. 2 messages from Martin. 1 from Denise. 3 from Ethan. We need to talk. Call me now. What have you done? Kira stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she turned the phone face down. She drove not home but to the office. The streets were mostly empty, the city's daytime urgency replaced with a softer, more honest quiet. In her office, she flicked on the lamp and sat at her desk. The grey line agreement lay where she'd left it, the ink on her signature already dry, the other copies filed. On her screen, an email notification blinked from Adriana. Saw the live stream. Bold move. Proud to be in business with you. Kira smiled, the expression small but real. She opened a new document and typed, to contracts@holdengroup.com, mail to contracts@holdengroup.com, subject, notice of termination, Redwood Lane Interior Supply Agreement. Her fingers moved steadily, outlining the terms, referencing the clause numbers, stating dates and obligations. No blame. No accusations, just facts. When she was done, she read it 3 times. Not to tweak the language, it was already clean, but to feel the weight of each sentence. Then she hit send. The message whooshed away, a quiet sound in a quiet room. Kira leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. For the first time in months, her chest didn't feel tight. She picked up her phone, now vibrating again with a fresh wave of calls. She scrolled through the missed calls list and set it gently on the desk, screen down once more. Not tonight. Tonight was for something else. She opened her journal, the one place she still wrote longhand, and turned to a blank page. At the top she wrote, Chapter 1. The first honest deal. Beneath it she wrote, in smaller letters, a quiet strategist who funded everything, finally done being invisible. The words looked right there. She capped the pen and set it aside. Outside her window, the city's lights blinked and shifted. This, she realized, was not the end of anything. It was the moment she finally stepped outside a story she hadn't written. She reached for the grey line contract once more and signed the final copy that had been waiting for her ink. As she did, she felt something unclench inside her. A carefully held breath finally exhaled. She turned off her phone, set it in the desk drawer, and closed it with a soft click. Then she whispered to the empty room, not as a declaration but as a promise to herself. I'm not your safety net. I'm my own foundation. And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.